Hi, this is Nolan from Benchmark, and in today's video we're going to be running a couple of different range tests with a 900 MHz radio antenna, a 400 MHz radio antenna, and StormCaster. And the reason I want to run these tests is I want to show you guys what you can expect in the real world out of your radios and kind of some of the factors that go into influencing how your radio performs, because we get a lot of questions here at the tech support desk, so I thought it was high time we answered some of those questions. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to throw up a very technical and highly detailed image of a radio transmission. And what these radio waves are doing is they're traveling perpendicular from our antenna and they're radiating out. If any of you had to take any sort of physics courses through university or college, you're probably very familiar with some of these concepts, so I'm not going to get too in detail. You can see from my nice artistic rendering what is happening. Now, why this is important and why I wanted to show you is in today's range test, I'm going to kind of be seeing how terrain influences those radio waves. So what I've done is I've set up my receivers here, and I'm going to drive to a couple places where our terrain dips down, where I'm going to get a shadow from our radio, which you can see again from my very professional and highly detailed technical drawing. So I'm going to run 3 different tests today. The first one's going to be a 900 MHz radio antenna test on our 400 MHz radio broadcast. Now, why that's important is this antenna is obviously not tuned for that frequency, but despite that, we do actually get quite a few calls where guys are throwing this 900 MHz radio antenna on their receiver and using the 400 MHz antenna and then wondering why they don't get any range. So I'll get into the results of that and then I'll explain why that is a little bit later in the video. I'm then going to test our regular 400 MHz radio, and we're going to see how this terrain shadowing influences that. And then finally I'm going to use StormCaster, and we're going to see why StormCaster might be preferable for some of you guys in these kind of environments. So without any further ado, I've got my base set up. It's broadcasting at 450. It's using all of those settings that we used in our range video, which I'll link to in the top right corner if you haven't seen that. And I'm now going to drive down the road and pick up with you in a minute when we've run out of range on our 900 MHz antennas. So I will be back with you in an instant. Okay, so I've driven down the road here a bit and I've pulled over to the side of the road because I'm already getting intermittent radio issues with this 900 MHz antenna. Now, according to Field Genius here, I am 1.2 kilometers from my base, which, let's be real, is not very far, especially when we can consider the 400 MHz antenna, when we are using it properly, can get us close to 3 to 5 kilometers in these kind of conditions without too much of a headache, and 10 kilometers when we're out on the bald top prairie like we had in our other video that, again, I'll link to in the top right corner. So the reason these antennas don't work as well is they are tuned differently. So I'm going to put up a graphic that somebody else so graciously made, and you can see here that the difference in tuning of the antenna makes all the difference in receiving the wavelength. If the antenna is not tuned to the correct wavelength, it's not going to receive the correct wavelength in strenuous conditions, and you'll be unable to get any radio. So you can see I'm getting a bit of radio right now, but I'm just on the outer limits. So I'm going to drive back to my base. I'm going to put the proper antennas on now that I've illustrated my point, and we're going to drive a little bit further and see how the terrain shadowing actually affects our radio transmission. So I will see you guys in a minute here. Okay, so I've driven down into a park by our office, and as you saw in that time lapse as we came down, there's quite a big elevation change. So what I've done is I've moved away from the hill, and I'm actually getting radio now. And to illustrate my point about the 900 MHz antenna earlier, I'm now 3 kilometers away and I still have plenty of range, and I have no intermittent radio like I was seeing at a kilometer and a bit previously. So what I'm going to do now is, you can see I've got radio out here, is I'm actually going to move in close to the hill so we can see that radio shadowing effect in action. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hike the camera much closer to the hill and see how close we got to get to lose that radio and have that radio shadow observed. Because what we're seeing now is the radio shadow has been overcome and we're having that signal propagate again and expand out, giving us the radio we need at this range. So we'll be back in a second here, and I'm going to move a bit closer to the hill. Okay, so I've moved from the river. I'm much closer to the hill. As you can see, there is some homes up there. There is the bridge we drove across earlier to get down into the park. And what I have right now is kind of intermittent radio. So looking at my data collector, I have a data age of 67 seconds. And although my radio light is flashing, it's obviously not very good, and I'm actually losing fix very often down in this position. Now, if I move a bit closer to the water down there, I actually lose my fix entirely, and if I move a bit higher and over top of the bridge, I can regain it. So I'm kind of right on the border of my radio shadow right now, right? So that image that I showed you earlier, and I'm putting up on screen right now, you can see I've kind of got this cutoff where I have lost the propagation of my radio waves, and I'm unable to receive it with my rover. Now, fortunately, you're not completely SOL, as my grandmother would say. When you are in this position and you have no radio waves, you can try a couple of things to try to get a fix to get your shots, especially if you only have 1 or 2 shots that you got to get in one of these dead zones. The first option is that you can use the pole to get higher up. Now, what you can do is you can expand the pole, and obviously that will increase the odds that you're going to be over top of this radio shadow. Now, that is not without some drawbacks. You do have to remember that as you increase your pole height, that is going to increase any error you see, whether that be in your bubble or from your tilt measurement. So if your pole's not perfectly level, you're going to be expounding that error over the distance of the pole. Your other thing that you can try to do is you can try to get a fixed solution, maybe on top of this hill or on top of this embankment, run down. The Hemisphere S631 does a pretty good job of holding its fix. You can get your fixed solution, run back up, and I would recommend at the very least using SureFix or inversing between the points to make sure that that solution is good, as you do not have radio, so I do not want to tell you to go take that shot and use it and trust it when you're not receiving any live corrections from the base. And obviously your final option, and probably the least ideal, especially if you only have a couple of points you got to do in one of these dead zones, is you'll have to move your base. So you can shoot a point with your rover, move your base over that point, reset it up, reconfigure, get your fixed solution, get the data you need, and then get on your merry way. So there's one final test I want to do here with our 400 megahertz radio before we switch over to StormCaster, and that's, I'm actually going to try to get up above my base. So what I'm going to do is, I'm in the bottom of a valley right now. I'm going to drive to the very top of the valley and see if I still get any radio and see what our results are like up there. So again, let me hop back in the car and we'll drive over to this next location. Okay, so I've gotten up on top of the hill, and you can see just over my left shoulder, that is actually where our office is. I'll put a little arrow. We're only 1.4 kilometers from my base station, but I kind of wanted to use this to illustrate 2 points. You might be able to just see it behind me. There is a giant dirt mound with an excavator on top of it. Now, if I go right up on that dirt mound, I'm going to have some radio issues, as I obviously cannot send radio waves directly through dirt. Now, in this specific spot where I am, I'm actually able to send radio signals up the hill here. This isn't too steep of a hill, so I'm pretty good in a lot of these locations. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the camera around here, and what you can see is there is a quite precipitous drop-off directly in front of me here. Now, if I go down this drop-off, I'm going to lose radio. Now, unfortunately, there's only me today, so I don't have a cameraman to come with me. But as soon as I go over this hill, I lose radio. So this is another spot where I've got a radio shadow, and I've got to be getting the radio up the hill here. I'm kind of reflecting the waves up the hill. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to head back towards the office here and get our StormCaster set up, so I can kind of show you some of the weirder places I can go with StormCaster and not have to worry about losing UHF. So let's get back in the car, get back to the office, and see what kind of results we can get out of StormCaster. Okay, so I've set up my base on StormCaster, and before I drive down the road and we check out those spots I was having some radio issues in earlier today, I kind of wanted to give you guys a quick rundown of what StormCaster is and how it works. So the idea behind StormCaster is that I'm broadcasting, instead of over UHF directly to another receiver, I'm broadcasting over cell to a server, which then passes the information to my rover. So what I've got is I've got a SIM card inside of my base. It's going to send the corrections off to the cloud, and then it's going to beam it down to the receiver, which you can see in my ever lovely animation here. So the idea is, no matter what the terrain is, no matter what is between you and your base, you'll always be able to get corrections from your base as long as you have that cell correction. So let's head back down to Bonus Park here and see what kind of performance I can get out of StormCaster. Okay, so we're back in Bonus Park here, and as expected, I am getting a fix on StormCaster. As you can see, my radio light's flashing, I'm getting a good solid connection. My data age, if I look here, is at 1 second, exactly as expected, and I'm still 2.8 kilometers, just like before, from my base station. Now, I couldn't have dreamed of getting a position down by the water here with the internal radios, so what I'm going to do with StormCaster is I'm going to bring it over, and I can put it right down on a rock here next to the water, and I'm still getting corrections without an issue. Now, obviously, I'm even more shadowed if I was using my UHF radio, and I'd have a very hard time getting this position. I can even, if I wanted to, if I'm getting really creative, jam it all the way over here, get a tilted shot, and I still have this even with a big metal obstruction, hills, houses, everything around there. With StormCaster, I don't have to worry about it. So, I know it works in the shadowed spot in the park, so let's head up the hill, make sure it works there, and see if we can even get down in that gully and get the shot down there. So, again, I'm gonna head back to my car and I will see you in a minute. Okay, so I'm back up on top of the hill. I've switched the camera around to that gully I was telling you folks about. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna walk down to the gully, get my shot, and because I'm using StormCaster, I don't have to worry about any of those UHF limitations. So, give me a second, I'm gonna hike down there, get my shot, and then we'll move on here. Okay, so this is the final shot that I wanted to use StormCaster for and kind of demonstrate what you can get out of this. So I am only 2.8 kilometers as the crow flies to my base, which is not particularly far, but as you saw from that drive, I'm well up that hill. In fact, I've gained about 250, 300 meters in elevation. In fact, where that radio tower is, there's another hill, and then all the way down to my base. I have no shot of getting any radio here, but I am only 3 kilometers from my base. So my baseline's still pretty tight. I'm going to be getting good residuals, I just can't get UHF radio. With StormCaster though, I have no issues. You can see my radio light is flashing. I am still good. I've got a fix. Everything is working out just as I want, and it's because of StormCaster that I'm able to get these results. So, that is it for today's video. That's kind of what I wanted to show you with StormCaster and show you that there are alternatives to UHF that can give you some very, very good results. So, kind of to recap, if you're in a shadowing situation where you're below your base, you got a couple different options. You can raise your pull, try to get above that radio shadowing. You can try to get a fixed solution above that radio shadow and then try to keep the fix down into where you can't get any radio. Or third, you're gonna have to move your base. Now, if you're above your base, your options are a bit more limited because obviously you can't raise your pole, that's gonna make it worse. So what you can do is you can actually get an external antenna like that for an external 35 watt radio and angle it up the hill and try to broadcast your corrections up the hill. Otherwise, you're gonna have to move your base. Those are your only 2 real options. Now, you can avoid all of those issues with StormCaster. You can broadcast your corrections over the network. You don't have to worry about terrain. You don't have to worry about interference. All of those things are irrelevant when you're using StormCaster. Now, that's not to say this is the perfect solution. Obviously, if you don't have a network or you don't have cell corrections in the area you're surveying, StormCaster is not going to do you a whole heck of a lot. But for those of you that have cell service, that have a little bit longer sites that you need to go, that you can't always get radio in every location, please give us a shout. We've got some extended trials on StormCaster available right now. Give it a try it out, see how it works for you, compare it against UHF, do your own tests, do your own due diligence, and we won't charge you anything during that trial. So if you want more information on that, you know, I'm gonna put a link down in the description down below. Go request a quote, tell us you want the free trial, tell us that this video sent you over, and we'll get that all going for you. But for now, that is everything in today's video. That is comparison of UHF, some of the problems with it, some of the solutions to get around it, and to StormCaster, our end-trip service. And if you have any questions about anything you've seen in today's video or any questions about anything you've seen on our YouTube channel, please give us a call at 1-888-286-3204 or visit us on the web at bench-mark.ca. And if you want to see more content like this, please hit the like and subscribe button down below. It really does help us out and helps me keep making these videos.